"You kissed me while I was out," the rancher blurted. The Apache woman smirked. "I saved you." John wiped the sweat from his brow as he trudged along the fence line, the late afternoon sun beating down on his broad shoulders. The ranch had always been a hard place to manage, but it was his home, and he had worked tirelessly to make it thrive. Rolling hills stretched out in every direction, dotted with cattle grazing lazily and the occasional stubborn horse that refused to follow his calls. The wind carried the scent of dry grass, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, circling high above the open land. He paused for a moment, leaning on his fence post, and squinted at the horizon. Rumors had reached him through passing travelers and neighboring ranchers. Apache raids were becoming more frequent in the area. Most of the reports were vague, and some sounded exaggerated. Still, there was a knot in his stomach, a quiet unease that he couldn't shake. He had lived in the area all his life, and he prided himself on being self-reliant. Danger, he told himself, was always present in these parts, and he had survived before. Surely he could manage now. Still, as he adjusted his wide-brimmed hat and started toward the next fence post, he couldn't help but feel eyes on him. The shadows of the hills seemed to shift unnaturally, and a low rustle came from the brush at the edge of the clearing. John's hand instinctively went to the revolver at his hip, his fingers curling around the worn grip. He was no stranger to hard work or threats, but something about this afternoon felt different. The first sign of real trouble came as a loud snort and a sudden clatter. A herd of wild horses, startled by some unseen disturbance, bolted from the tree line. Their hooves thundered across the dry earth, sending dust into the air in swirling clouds. One of the stallions, large and fiery-eyed, veered directly toward John. His heart pounded as he stepped back, trying to calculate whether he could move fast enough to avoid the charging beast. But before he could react, a blur of movement appeared to his side. A woman emerged from the shadows with astonishing speed and precision. She was tall and strong, yet her movements carried the grace of someone completely at home in the wild. Her dark hair was tied back, and her eyes, sharp and knowing, assessed the situation instantly. Without hesitation, she leapt toward the stallion, making a series of quick gestures and movements that caused the horse to slow and veer away. The herd followed, scattering in every direction, leaving the immediate area calm again. John stared, stunned. He had dealt with many things in his life, storms, wild animals, and even the occasional thief, but nothing had prepared him for this. Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice rough from both exertion and shock. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to him, a faint smirk playing on her lips. Her confidence was unshakable, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. "You need to pay more attention," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The world doesn't wait for those who hesitate." John took a step closer, still trying to catch his breath. I thought I had it under control," he admitted, feeling a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. Pride had always been a part of him, but it seemed almost laughable now in comparison to her composure.
"I didn't expect, this."
The woman's gaze softened ever so slightly, though the confident edge never left it.
"Expecting is the first mistake," she replied.
"You survive by acting, not waiting." Her words struck him harder than any punch could have. She was not just fast or strong. She was clever, fearless, and entirely in control of the situation. John's mind raced as he tried to understand her presence. How had she appeared so suddenly? How had she known exactly what to do? And more importantly, why had she risked herself to save him? The questions tumbled in his head, but before he could voice them, she stepped closer. There was a slight glint in her eyes, almost playful, almost teasing, that made John feel both nervous and fascinated. "You're lucky I was nearby," she said finally, her voice softer now but still carrying authority. "Not everyone gets a second chance when they're caught off guard like that." She moved with a fluid grace, brushing a bit of dust from her clothing, as if the stampede had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. John shook his head slowly, still in disbelief.
"Lucky? Yeah, I guess I am."
He tried to speak again, but the words stumbled awkwardly. His usual confidence felt muted, overshadowed by a strange mix of respect, admiration, and something he didn't quite want to name yet. For a few moments they simply stood there, the sound of distant hooves fading into silence. The ranch, which had moments ago felt tense and threatening, now seemed to hold a strange stillness. John couldn't help but notice how different she was from anyone he had ever met. She wasn't just brave, she was calm in chaos, self-assured in a way that made him question his own understanding of courage. Finally he spoke again, almost without thinking. "You kissed me while I was out?" The words escaped his lips before he could stop them. His cheeks warmed instantly as he realized what he had said, but there was no taking them back. The woman's smirk widened just slightly, her eyes glinting with humor. "I saved you," she replied simply, her tone teasing but serious. There was no need to explain further. The meaning was clear. She had done what needed to be done, and it had been enough. John swallowed hard, feeling a mix of relief, embarrassment, and a strange thrill. He had faced danger many times, but he had never experienced anything quite like this. The rush of adrenaline from the stampede, combined with the intensity of her presence, left him momentarily disoriented. Yet beneath it all was a deep sense of gratitude and a curiosity he couldn't ignore. "Where did you come from?" he finally asked, his voice steadier this time. "Where I'm needed," she answered simply, her smirk fading into a more serious expression. "And right now, that's here." She paused, looking around at the open ranch and the grazing cattle. "You've done well with this place, but it's not enough to survive on skill alone. Awareness, preparation, and quick thinking matter just as much." John nodded slowly, realizing she was right. He had been confident in his experience, his knowledge of the land, and his ability to handle most situations. But today had shown him that experience alone could not guarantee safety. There was more to surviving out here, more than brute strength or stubbornness. For the first time in a long while, John felt a flicker of humility. He had always relied on himself, trusting only what he could control. But now he saw the truth in her words. Survival often depended on connections, on the willingness to accept help, and on the courage to act when it was needed most. The woman glanced around again, taking in the ranch, the cattle, and the distant hills. "You should check your fences," she said finally. "A stampede like that can leave more than a few problems behind." John managed a small laugh, the tension easing slightly. "I suppose you're right." He glanced at her, still marveling at her presence. "And thank you. Really." She nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that said more than words could convey. Without another comment, she turned and disappeared into the brush as suddenly as she had appeared, leaving John standing alone once more, but not unchanged. He took a deep breath, feeling the wind on his face and the weight of the moment sinking in. The ranch was still his responsibility, the sun was still beating down, and the land still demanded attention. But something had shifted within him. He had seen courage, skill, and fearlessness in a person who seemed to belong to the wild itself, and it had left an impression he could not ignore. As he walked back to the barn, checking fences and cattle along the way, John couldn't help but glance toward the tree line where she had vanished. A part of him hoped she would return, not just for help, but because meeting her had sparked a sense of wonder he hadn't felt in years. The ranch was still his home, but now it seemed larger, wilder, and more mysterious than ever before. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that this encounter was only the beginning of a story far bigger than he had ever imagined. John had barely managed to get back to the main ranch house when he realized he had more questions than answers. He leaned against the doorway, brushing dust from his shirt, and tried to calm the still racing thoughts in his mind. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, and the ranch suddenly felt both peaceful and strange, almost surreal. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had saved him. Her presence lingered like a shadow, as if she had imprinted herself on the very air around him. How had she appeared so suddenly? How had she known exactly what to do to stop the stampede? And most importantly, why had she risked herself for him? He ran a hand through his hair and shook his head. Questions without answers were frustrating, and yet there was a part of him that didn't want immediate answers. There was a spark of curiosity he hadn't felt in years, a strange, restless energy that made him feel alive. Hours passed, and as darkness settled over the ranch, John heard movement outside. The soft crunch of footsteps caught his attention, and he grabbed a lantern to see better. There, at the edge of the barn, stood the woman once again. "You're still here?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. His heart thumped harder than it had during the stampede. She smirked, that same confident, teasing smirk he remembered.
Of course I am. You didn't seem ready to face the rest of the evening on your own. Her voice was calm, but it carried the same quiet authority as before.
John opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out immediately. He swallowed, feeling a mix of embarrassment and relief.
"I thank you again," he said finally. "I don't even know your name."
"And it's nice to meet you properly, John." Her eyes gleamed in the dim lantern light, and there was a warmth in her expression that softened her sharp confidence. John nodded, still trying to recover from the whirlwind of emotions that had overtaken him. He felt drawn to her bravery, her skill, and the way she seemed completely at ease in the world, even when it was threatening or chaotic. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The quiet of the ranch was comforting, broken only by the occasional low moo of a cow or the distant cry of a night bird. Then, almost as if compelled by some unspoken understanding, Naya stepped closer. "You know," she said, her tone light but pointed, "you could use a bit more preparation around here. A ranch isn't just about fences and cattle. You have to be aware of everything, every animal, every trail, every shadow." John laughed, a low, rueful sound.
I thought I knew all that, he admitted. Apparently I was wrong. Naya's smirk widened, and she shook her head slightly.
"Not wrong, just inexperienced in some ways. But that's all right. Experience comes with guidance and attention. Some things you learn only by facing danger, like you did today." Her words struck a chord. John had always relied on his instincts, his strength, and his knowledge of the land. But her perspective was different. She didn't just react to danger. She anticipated it, moved with it, and controlled it. It was a skill he had never fully mastered, and now he realized how much he could learn from someone like her. "Would you stay for a while?" he asked, almost hesitantly. "I mean, you saved me, and it's late. It might be safer to be around the ranch tonight." Naya considered him for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. Then she nodded, but with the same quiet confidence she had shown since the start. "I can stay, but only because I want to see if you're truly capable of learning something. Otherwise, it would be a waste of my time." John chuckled, feeling both amused and honored. "Fair enough," he said. "I'll try to keep up." They spent the evening in the main house, the lantern casting flickering shadows across the room. Naya examined the maps of the ranch, pointing out places where a fence might fail or where cattle could wander. She explained how to watch for signs in the land, the subtle footprints of animals, the broken twigs that hinted at movement, and the patterns of the wind that carried sound and scent. John listened intently, amazed by the depth of her knowledge. He had always thought himself an expert, but Naya had a perspective that he had never considered. Every detail mattered, every observation counted, and every decision could mean the difference between safety and disaster.
"You're more skilled than most men I've met," John admitted after a while, his voice quiet with genuine respect. Naya smiled faintly, a mix of pride and amusement.
"Skill is only part of it," she said. "Awareness and courage matter more. You had courage today, John, even if you didn't realize it. That's why you survived." He nodded slowly, feeling a warmth in his chest. He had always valued his courage, but her words made him see it differently. Courage wasn't just about facing danger. It was about trusting yourself, trusting others, and taking action when it mattered most. As the night deepened, they shared stories. John spoke of his childhood on the ranch, the long days under the sun, and the challenges he had faced keeping the land alive and productive. Naya spoke of her life among her Apache community, her connection to the land, and the lessons she had learned about survival and wisdom. There was an easy rhythm to their conversation, a growing comfort that allowed them to laugh, tease, and challenge each other. The initial tension that had surrounded their meeting began to fade, replaced by mutual respect and curiosity. John found himself drawn to her courage and wit, while Naya seemed intrigued by his dedication, intelligence, and resilience. At one point, John couldn't help but ask, "Why do you help people like me? Most would expect trouble or danger, and yet you stepped in without hesitation." Naya's expression grew thoughtful. "Because some risks are worth taking," she said quietly. "Not for reward, not for recognition, but because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes helping someone else is the only way to test yourself, to see if your skills, your courage, and your judgment are truly enough." John considered her words, feeling their weight. They weren't just words of explanation. They were a philosophy, a code of living that he realized he had never truly considered. And yet he felt compelled to follow it, to learn from her, and to understand more about the world through her eyes. As the evening wore on, Naya eventually stood, stretching and preparing to leave. John felt a pang of disappointment. "You're leaving already?" he asked, trying to mask his concern. "I have other places to be," she replied, her voice calm. "But I'll return tomorrow." "There's much to teach you, John, and you'll need guidance if you want to be ready for what comes next." John nodded, a mixture of relief and anticipation stirring in him. "I'll be ready," he said firmly. "I want to learn everything you can teach me." She gave him a faint, approving smile before disappearing into the darkness once more, leaving John alone on the porch with the cool night air brushing against his face. He watched the stars twinkle above, feeling a strange mixture of excitement, curiosity, and determination. For the first time in a long while, John felt that he was on the brink of something greater than himself, something that would challenge him, change him, and perhaps even redefine his understanding of courage, trust, and connection. Naya had not just saved him from a stampede, she had awakened a part of him he hadn't known existed, a part ready to face the unknown with open eyes and a willing heart. He closed the door of the ranch house and took one last glance toward the horizon, the land now holding a promise he had never felt before. The ranch was still his responsibility. The sun had set, and the world was quiet. Yet for the first time, John felt that he was not alone. Someone remarkable had entered his life, someone who would push him, teach him, and perhaps even change the course of his future. And with that thought, he went inside, ready to face whatever challenges and lessons the next day would bring. The next morning, the ranch was bathed in soft golden light as the sun crept over the horizon. John had risen early, as he always did, but today he felt a different kind of energy. The memory of the previous day's events and of Naya's presence lingered in his mind. He had felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Something about her courage, her sharp eyes, and her confident demeanor had shaken him out of his routine life and made him aware of the world in new ways. He was in the barn, checking the horses and inspecting the fences, when a familiar shadow appeared at the edge of the clearing. Naya was back. She moved toward him with the same fluid, assured steps as before. Her eyes, alert and bright, scanned the land as if it were an open book. "Morning," she said simply, a small smile on her lips. "Ready to learn?" John felt a thrill of anticipation. "I've been ready since yesterday," he replied, adjusting his hat and walking toward her. There was no awkwardness now, just a shared understanding that today would be different. They began by inspecting the fences along the northern pasture. Naya watched closely as John checked the posts and the wiring. When she saw him hesitate at a weak spot, she didn't criticize. Instead, she demonstrated how to reinforce it quickly and efficiently, showing him techniques he had never considered. "You see," she explained, "it's not just about making something strong. It's about anticipating where it might fail and planning for it. Every line, every post, every wire matters." John nodded, trying to absorb her words. He had always taken pride in his ranching skills, but Naya's perspective was entirely different. She noticed details he had overlooked, patterns in the land and the behavior of the animals that gave her insight into potential problems. After finishing the fence inspection, they moved toward the pastures where the cattle grazed. Naya taught him how to read the subtle signs in the herd, the way a cow's ears flicked, the direction of their gaze. even the rhythm of their movements. Each small observation could indicate illness, stress, or danger. "Animals have their own language," she said, crouching low to observe a cow that had strayed from the group. "If you learn to understand it, you can prevent problems before they start. You don't just react, you anticipate." Her knowledge was immense, and her confidence inspired him. He realized that survival and success on the ranch were not just about strength or endurance. They were about awareness, patience, and understanding. As the day progressed, they worked side by side on multiple tasks. They repaired a section of fencing that had been damaged by the stampede, tended to the animals, and even gathered firewood for the evening. Through it all, Naya remained patient but assertive, guiding John and encouraging him to trust his instincts while also learning from her insights. During a break, they sat on a fallen log, the heat of the afternoon sun warming their faces. John couldn't resist asking a question that had been on his mind since their first meeting. "Do you ever get scared?" he asked, genuinely curious. Naya looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. "Of course I do," she said. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do when fear is present. Every choice I make, every step I take involves some risk. But fear alone doesn't dictate what happens next. Action does." John considered her words. He had faced fear before, but he had often allowed it to cloud his judgment. Naya's perspective was different. Fear was a guide, not a limit. He felt a growing respect for her and an increasing desire to learn from her example. As the afternoon wore on, John began to notice something else. Working with Naya was not just educational, it was inspiring. Her energy was contagious, her focus unwavering, and her confidence in herself and the land around her was magnetic. He found himself wanting to be better, not just as a rancher, but as a person. They moved to the far pasture next, where some of the younger horses had wandered close to a cliffside. Naya taught John how to approach them calmly, reading their movements and anticipating their reactions. Together, they guided the horses safely back to the main herd, using patience, observation, and subtle commands. "You're improving quickly," she said, her tone warm but teasing.
"I can see that you're starting to notice what I notice."
John smiled, a mixture of pride and amusement. "I'm trying," he said. "It's not easy, but I think I'm starting to understand." By late afternoon, they had returned to the ranch house, tired but satisfied. The day had been long, filled with learning and activity, and John felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't experienced in a long time. Yet, despite the physical exhaustion, his mind remained alert, thinking constantly about the lessons Naya had shared. As they rested, he found himself asking more personal questions, drawn by curiosity about her life and experiences. Naya, in turn, shared stories of her upbringing in her Apache community, the skills she had learned, the challenges she had faced, and the deep respect she held for the land.
"You've had an extraordinary life," John said, shaking his head in admiration. "I can see why you're so confident."
"You've learned so much about survival and courage." Naya shrugged lightly, a faint smile on her lips. "It's not extraordinary. It's just life. You learn to adapt, to observe, to respect the world around you. Those who don't survive long."
John laughed softly, realizing the truth in her words. He had survived, but only because he had been fortunate and resilient.
Naya had survived because she had studied, prepared, and understood the world in ways he was only beginning to grasp. As evening fell, a cool breeze swept through the ranch, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Naya stood, stretching her arms above her head. "Tomorrow will be more challenging," she said. "There's more to learn, and the ranch has other hidden dangers you need to understand. Are you ready for that?"
John felt a surge of determination.
"I'm ready," he said firmly. "I want to learn everything you can teach me." Naya's eyes sparkled with approval, and she gave him a small nod. "Good. Then tomorrow we continue." As she prepared to leave for the night, John realized that their connection was deepening. It wasn't just about learning or survival anymore. It was about trust, respect, and a growing sense of partnership. He had never met anyone like her, and he felt both challenged and inspired by her presence. Alone in the ranch house that night, John reflected on the day's events. He had learned so much, not just about ranching or survival, but about courage, awareness, and the value of guidance. Naya had shown him that strength alone was not enough. That understanding, observation, and a willingness to act wisely were equally important. He thought about her words, her teachings, and the way she had pushed him to be better. He realized that their time together was transforming him, making him more attentive, more thoughtful, and more connected to the land he loved so dearly. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that this partnership, between him and this remarkable woman, was just the beginning. Together they would face challenges, learn from each other, and perhaps even discover something unexpected. The power of trust, respect, and friendship born from courage and shared experience. The ranch was quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. John could hear the distant calls of nocturnal animals and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. Yet, despite the stillness, he felt energized, ready to face whatever lessons or challenges the next day would bring. Naya had not only returned to guide him, she had awakened something within him, a determination to learn, grow, and embrace the world with open eyes. For John, the day had begun with fences and cattle, but it ended with a sense of purpose he had never known. The ranch was his responsibility, yes, but now it felt alive in a new way. And Naya, with her bravery, knowledge, and quiet strength, had become a guiding force, someone he could trust, learn from, and perhaps even come to admire in ways he was only beginning to understand. As he lay down to rest that night, he felt a mixture of exhaustion, anticipation, and gratitude. Tomorrow promised new lessons, new challenges, and new moments of discovery. And for the first time, John felt confident that with Naya by his side, he could face whatever the land or life threw at him. The next morning, the ranch was quiet, but John felt a tension in the air that made him uneasy. The early sun cast long shadows across the fields, and the distant hills seemed darker, more ominous than usual. Naya had returned at dawn, just as she always did, her presence bringing both comfort and focus. Today, however, there was a seriousness in her eyes that made John pay closer attention. "Something is wrong," she said quietly, scanning the horizon. "The north pasture, there's movement." John followed her gaze and saw it, a cloud of dust rising near the far fence line. At first he thought it might be a wandering herd, but the shapes moving in the distance didn't match the slow, deliberate patterns of cattle or horses. His stomach tightened as he realized the truth. Someone, or something, was approaching the ranch. "Riders," Naya said, her voice steady but alert. "And they're not friendly." John felt his pulse quicken. He had dealt with trouble before, but this felt different. These weren't just trespassers or thieves. They moved with purpose, and the distance between them and the ranch was closing fast. "What do we do?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Naya stepped closer, her eyes scanning every movement. "We prepare," she said. "But first we need to move the animals to the safest area." Together they worked quickly. Naya guided John with precise instructions, showing him how to herd the cattle into a secure corral behind the barn. They moved the horses to a small sheltered paddock, checking each animal to make sure none were injured or frightened. The process was tense, and every sound, the clatter of hooves, the distant shouts, the wind rustling through the trees, kept their nerves on edge. Once the animals were secured, Naya turned to John. "We have to be ready for the worst. These riders aren't looking for conversation." John nodded, gripping the wooden rail of the corral as adrenaline surged through him. He had learned much from Naya, how to observe, anticipate, and act. But now those lessons would be tested in the most direct way. As the riders approached, their intentions became clear. They were a group of men looking to intimidate, to take what was not theirs. Their leader, a tall man on a dark horse, shouted orders that echoed across the ranch, demanding that John surrender his land or face consequences. John felt a surge of anger and determination. This was his home, the land he had worked tirelessly to protect, and he would not give it up without a fight. Naya placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Stay calm," she said. "We can handle this, but we must work together." She moved with swift, precise movements, positioning herself near the fence line while instructing John to follow her lead. They used the terrain to their advantage, hiding behind boulders and low hills, keeping the riders unaware of their exact positions. Naya's knowledge of the land gave them an edge. They could anticipate the riders' movements and plan counteractions before the intruders could act. The first clash came quickly. One of the men tried to approach the barn, presumably to take the cattle, but Naya was ready. She moved silently, intercepting him with a firm command that startled him into retreating. John followed her example, using his strength and presence to block another man from gaining access to the corral. The confrontation was tense. John felt his heart pounding, adrenaline mixing with fear and focus. Every move counted. Naya's calm, decisive actions reminded him of her earlier lessons. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the ability to act wisely despite it. As the skirmish continued, John and Naya coordinated seamlessly. She directed him to strategic positions, taught him how to anticipate the rider's actions, and encouraged him to trust his instincts. For the first time, John realized how much he had grown under her guidance. He was no longer reacting blindly. He was thinking, anticipating, and acting with purpose. The riders, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, attempted to circle the ranch. Naya noticed the movement immediately and signaled to John. "We can't let them separate the animals," she said.
Urged them back toward the corral. Together they worked quickly, moving the cattle and horses away from the perimeter and securing the gates. The riders shouted and tried to intimidate them, but John and Naya's combined presence was formidable.
Each action they took was precise and deliberate, reflecting the lessons learned over the past days.
In the midst of the chaos, John caught a glimpse of Naya's face, calm, focused, and unflinching.
Her confidence bolstered his own, giving him the courage to act decisively. He realized that their bond had deepened, forged through trust and shared experience. They were no longer just teacher and student. They were partners facing a common challenge. Finally, after a tense hour, the riders began to retreat. They had underestimated the strength, skill, and strategy of John and Naya. As they disappeared over the hills, John let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. Naya turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. "Not bad," she said, her voice carrying both pride and amusement. "You handled yourself well." John felt a mixture of relief and pride. "We handled it," he corrected, nodding toward her. "I couldn't have done it without you." She shrugged lightly, though her eyes betrayed a warmth. "You did your part, John. Courage, focus, and willingness to learn. That's what made the difference. Never underestimate what you can do when you trust yourself and those around you." As the sun began to set, they checked the ranch once more. Fences were secure, animals were safe, and the land was calm again. The challenge had been real, intense, and exhausting, but it had also strengthened their bond. John realized that Naya had not only taught him about survival and awareness, but also about trust, resilience, and the power of working together. Sitting on the porch of the ranch house, John looked at Naya and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly.
"You don't need to," she replied, her tone gentle but firm. "Actions speak louder than words. Keep learning, keep observing, and keep trusting yourself. That's all the thanks I need."
John nodded, feeling the weight of her words. They were more than a lesson. They were a philosophy, a guide for living on the land and facing challenges with courage and wisdom. As night fell, the ranch was quiet, the stars twinkling overhead. John and Naya sat together, sharing a moment of calm after the storm. The events of the day had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and revealed the depth of their partnership. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and they had prevailed together. John felt a renewed sense of purpose. The ranch was not just a place to work, it was a home to protect, a land to understand, and a space where courage, skill, and trust mattered more than anything. And with Naya by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. As he prepared for sleep, he thought about the lessons of the day, the strength of their partnership, and the bond that had grown between them. Naya had not only saved his ranch, she had helped him see the world differently, understand the value of trust and cooperation, and recognize the power of courage in action. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring new lessons, new challenges, and perhaps new moments of connection. But tonight he allowed himself a quiet sense of pride, relief, and hope. Together they had faced danger, and together they had prevailed. The morning after the confrontation, the ranch was calm. The sun rose slowly over the hills, casting a warm golden light on the fields. Birds sang softly, and the cattle moved peacefully in the pastures. John stood on the porch surveying the land he had fought so hard to protect. His muscles ached from the previous day's work, but his mind was clear, energized by the lessons and experiences he had shared with Naya. She appeared at the edge of the clearing as she always did, moving with quiet confidence. John smiled at her arrival, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and respect. Naya returned his smile, her eyes reflecting both amusement and warmth. There was a calm understanding between them now, an unspoken bond that had grown stronger through shared experiences, danger, and trust. "Good morning," John said, his voice steady. "Did you sleep well?"
I did, Naya replied simply, walking toward him. And you? Better than I have in a long time, he admitted.
"I keep thinking about yesterday, about everything you taught me and how we managed together." Naya's eyes softened.
"It's all about observation, action, and trust," she said.
"You did well because you trusted yourself and me. That's what makes the difference."
John nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had always valued independence and self-reliance, but now he understood that true strength came from knowing when to trust others, when to learn, and when to act together. Naya had shown him a world beyond his own understanding, a world where courage was measured not just by strength, but by wisdom, awareness, and connection. They spent the morning inspecting the ranch, checking fences, and tending to the animals. Every action they took was methodical and careful, reflecting both the lessons John had learned from Naya and the skills he had honed over years of hard work. He found himself anticipating her instructions, observing the land more closely, and thinking ahead in ways he never had before. During a pause, they sat on a rock overlooking the pastures, the wind blowing gently through the tall grass. John looked at Naya, feeling a mixture of admiration, respect, and something more, a quiet, unspoken connection that had grown between them over the past days.
"You've changed a lot," Naya said, her voice soft but deliberate. "You're more aware, more confident, and more focused."
"You've learned well." John smiled, feeling a warm sense of pride.
"And you've taught me more than I could have imagined," he said. "Not just about the land or the ranch, but about courage, trust, and seeing the world differently."
For a moment, they simply sat in silence, enjoying the calm of the morning and the gentle rhythm of life on the ranch. John felt a sense of peace he had not known before. The challenges, the danger, and the lessons had not only tested him, they had changed him, helped him grow, and made him appreciate the value of partnership and trust. As the day progressed, they worked together to prepare the ranch for any future threats. Naya taught John additional strategies for protecting the land, observing wildlife, and anticipating danger. Each lesson was practical, grounded in experience, and delivered with patience and care. John absorbed each instruction with determination, feeling a growing confidence in his own abilities and a deep respect for Naya's expertise. By mid-afternoon, the work was done, and they sat together near the barn, sharing a simple meal of bread and dried meat. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with mutual understanding and a shared sense of accomplishment. John felt compelled to speak, to express the gratitude and feelings that had grown inside him.
"Naya," he began, hesitating slightly. I don't know how to say this, but I'm glad you're here. Not just because you saved me or helped me with the ranch, but because you've changed the way I see everything.
You've taught me to trust, to act, and to face challenges with courage. And I
admire you for that. Naya looked at him, her expression softening.
For a moment she said nothing, and John felt a flicker of doubt. Then she smiled, a small approving smile that carried warmth and understanding. "You've grown a lot, John," she said gently, "and you've learned well. But admiration isn't enough. You must continue to act with courage, awareness, and respect, not just for me, but for yourself and the land you care for." He understood now that their bond was built on more than gratitude. It was built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the recognition of each other's strengths. He felt a quiet thrill at the thought of facing the future with Naya by his side, knowing that together they could overcome any challenge. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John and Naya walked together along the fence line. The land was calm, the animals secure, and the air filled with the gentle sounds of evening. The challenges of the past days had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and revealed the depth of their partnership. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and they had emerged stronger and more united. Naya stopped and turned to him, her eyes reflecting the last light of the setting sun. "You've done well, John," she said softly. "Not just with the ranch, but with yourself. You've learned to trust, to act wisely, and to see the world differently. That is more valuable than any skill or lesson." John felt a lump in his throat, moved by her words. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said honestly. "You didn't just save the ranch. You helped me see who I can be and what I can do when I face challenges with courage and trust." There was a long pause as they looked out over the land, feeling the quiet majesty of the ranch and the strength of their bond. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of grass, earth, and the promise of future days filled with work, learning, and shared experiences. Finally, Naya spoke again, her voice carrying both warmth and certainty. "The future will have its challenges," she said, "but I believe we can face them together. You've learned well, John, and you've shown courage and growth. That is what matters most." John nodded, feeling a sense of peace and determination. "Together," he said, echoing her words, "we can face anything." As night fell, the ranch grew quiet, the stars twinkling overhead. John and Naya sat together near the barn, sharing a moment of calm and reflection. The events of the past days had tested them, revealed their strengths, and forged a bond that would endure. They had faced danger, learned valuable lessons, and grown in ways neither had anticipated. John felt a sense of gratitude, admiration, and quiet happiness. The ranch was safe, the animals secure, and the land thriving. But more importantly, he had found a partner in Naya, a person who inspired him, challenged him, and had become an essential presence in his life. He realized that the story of the past days was more than a tale of danger and survival. It was a story of trust, growth, courage, and connection. Naya had not just saved him, she had helped him see the value of partnership, the importance of observation and awareness, and the power of acting with courage and respect. As they watched the stars emerge in the night sky, John felt a sense of closure and hope. The challenges had been met, the lessons learned, and the bond between them had deepened into something enduring. He knew that the future would hold more tests, more surprises, and more opportunities for growth. But he also knew that with Naya by his side, he could face whatever came next. And so, on that quiet night, with the ranch peaceful and the stars shining above, John and Naya sat together, knowing that they had not only survived but thrived, and that their connection, built on courage, trust, and mutual respect, would guide them through whatever adventures lay ahead. The ranch was more than a home now. It was a place of learning, partnership, and strength. John felt ready for the future, grateful for the past, and certain that whatever came next, he and Naya would face it together, with courage, awareness, and unwavering trust in each other.